topic seems especially apt this week. It's called Between Heaven and Earth, Humanity. We have someone who's going to be talking to us from the Theosophical tradition. And the Theosophical tradition has a very special place in the cosmos for humanity, wherever it may be located. And I think we'll probably hear about that a little bit from Kirk. Kirk Gradin is one of our treasured speakers who has spoken on a number of occasions here at Gems from the Wisdom Traditions. And today he will be speaking from the Theosophical tradition, which he has studied for a number of decades. And so I introduce Kirk to you very joyfully and gratefully that he's going to speak with us today.
Well, thank you, Renee. I'm going to share my screen. And we are going to open with a reading that was sent out to everyone from Thomas Carlyle. Cliff's going to do that for us.
Okay. The great antique heart, how like a child's in its simplicity, like a man's in its earnest solemnity and depth. Heaven lies over him wheresoever he goes or stands on the earth, making all the earth a mystic temple to him, the earth's business all a kind of worship. Glimpses of bright creatures flash in the common sunlight. Angels yet hover, doing God's messages among them. A great law of duty, high as these two infinitudes, heaven and hell, dwarfing all else, annihilating all else. It was a reality, and it is one. The garment only of it is dead. The essence of it lives through all times and all eternity. The essence of our being, the mystery in us that calls itself I. What words have we for such things? It is a breath of heaven. The highest being reveals himself in man. This body, these faculties, this life of ours, is it not all as a vesture for the unnamed?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Cliff. I put this talk together thinking that I would be speaking mostly to people who were not familiar with Theosophy. So those of you, I know there's a number of you in the audience right now who are very familiar with it. So you'll have to fill in some of the more complex parts of it that I'm leaving out. But we felt this quote from Carlyle was a good way to start because in it he beautifully describes a unity which we're told in Theosophical teaching has never left us, but which we may be blind to. And that's the unity of the triplicity of God, deity, God or deity, of humanity and of nature. And with these words, he kind of momentarily draws back the veil and gives us a glimpse of what it might be like to bridge heaven and earth, which Theosophy does teach is the great purpose and potentiality behind all human endeavor. So the word, as many of you know, Theosophia, first appears in the writings of Porphyry in his description of the teachings of Ammonius Saccas and Plotinus, 3rd century Pythagorean philosophers who also called themselves Philalethians, meaning lovers of truth. But the truths that they studied and taught have gone by many names in many different cultures and times. The Buddhists call it Abhidharma, the Hindus Sanatana Dharma, Gupta Vidya, or Brahm Vidya. It's said to be the Gnosis of the Gnostics and the Sophia of the Christian mystics. And this is one reason why Theosophy is also sometimes referred to as the Philosophia Perennis, for the same perennial teaching, which was revealed to aspirants in the mystery schools of classical Greece, is said to have instructed the legendary rishis of ancient India, who composed the Vedas and Upanishads, the king initiates of ancient Egypt, Moses, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Pythagoras, Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, and many others. What is currently known to us regarding all of these traditions and teachers is largely incomplete. And for example, as we heard from our speaker last week, Frank Perkins, in his previous talk, he pointed out that a great deal of the writings of Confucius and of Mengzi have been lost. And so we really don't know the whole scope of their teaching. And this is, we find is true again and again in many different traditions. And Theosophy also affirms that every great teacher had both a public and a private teaching, an exoteric and an esoteric teaching. And the esoteric was not given out publicly or written down, but only given orally to those who had bound themselves by vows of silence. And this is why it's still unknown what the mystery schools of classical Greece taught, for example, is because those vows were kept, the silence was kept. And this is also why, of course, that Jesus spoke in parables to the multitudes, but had a different teaching for his disciples. And in the Theosophical view, Jesus was indeed a teacher primarily of the ethics of Theosophia. He put them in a new garb, a new language, expressed them in a new way. And like many such reformers and adepts, both before and after him, not only was he publicly executed for it, but the truths he taught were twisted and distorted by the religion that was later established in his name. And this is one level of the meaning to the idea of crucifixion, which Kersey Graves, in his book in the late 1800s, which he called The World's 16 Crucified Saviors, pointed out this willing sacrifice that we see again and again in many myths and traditions that great teachers make, knowing that they will be misunderstood, opposed, and vilified. So although Theosophia is said to have always existed in every culture and clime, it was not until the late 1800s that a brilliant but very challenging outline of it was given for the first time in the English language by the Ukrainian-born savant named Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. And in 1873, after roughly 20 years of study and travel to some of the most remote centers of mystic instruction worldwide, she arrived in New York City and began to make both the ethics and the metaphysics of Theosophy known through a series of letters, actually, initially, that went to public press. And she was simultaneously working on her first large volume, which was published in 1877, called Isis Unveiled, which you see here in red, which is said to have ignited an international intellectual fervor. Besides a cross-cultural, multilingual, encyclopedic knowledge of diverse traditions of religion, philosophy, and science, both East and West, ancient and modern, her earliest writings also display an intimate familiarity with the dynamics of ancient meditational practices, with states of enlightened consciousness in a wide range of what she called the latent capacities in human nature, including very deep forms of intuition, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and so on. And in 1988, The Secret Doctrine, which was called her magnum opus, was published. And in 89, both The Key to Theosophy and The Voice of the Silence were released. And the key is, for anyone who's interested in an introduction to Theosophy, who's unfamiliar with it, the Key to Theosophy is a great place to start, because it's given in the context of a speaker who is Blavatsky and an inquirer who's coming from the standpoint of kind of an ignorant Westerner, like most of us are. And but then The Voice of the Silence, as you see here, is a small book that she translated from the Dravidian Telugu, very ancient language, which is said to be the first explicit introduction that the Western world had to the Bodhisattva path, which is also called the heart doctrine. And as part of this phenomenal literary outpouring, because throughout her life, she continued to write articles, which are now been collected in these 15 volumes. She made a few prophecies, and one of them was that in the last 25 years of the 20th century, another messenger would emerge who would continue her work. And many students of Theosophy are convinced that exactly such a teacher was found in Professor Raghavan Iyer, born in Madras in India, 1930. He was giving talks on Theosophy at the age of 10, received his BA at 18, and at 24 was awarded both a master's and doctorate degrees with first-class honors in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University. He taught at Oxford for 11 years while also lecturing in America and Africa, and finally accepted a professorship at UCSB in 1965. From 1975 to 1989, in addition to many other publications that bore his name, he wrote over 170 articles that are now available in a 3-volume collection called the Gupta Vidya. And each of these articles is a spiritual journey in and of itself, worthy of repeated study. While Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine mostly addressed a scientific mindset, the Gupta Vidya also addresses the more meta-psychological challenges faced by both the beginning and advanced students who are seeking this path, the means of bridge building, one could call it, between heaven and earth, the divine and the human, in the service of humanity. And among the many other revolutionary teachings that the Theosophical movement brought to the West, one central key pertinent to our theme today is that of the sevenfold nature of humanity and of the cosmos. And this is the idea that life as a whole can be best understood as a series of 7 interpenetrating planes of consciousness, substance, and energy, and that all the forces and planes that exist anywhere in the universe, seen or unseen, all exist in humanity. That is, man is the microcosm of the vastest macrocosm. But since most of us have a greater familiarity with the Christian tradition, and given the occasion of Easter, I'm going to introduce the sevenfold scheme via the biblical fourfold scheme by way of comparison. And in several of her writings, Blavatsky points out that there are 2 currents to be discerned in the New Testament of the Judeo-Christian Bible. One of them is made up of fragments, true fragments of an ancient Gnostic wisdom that far predates the Christian era. And these fragments, she says, are the unadulterated teachings of the wise Galilean adept that we know of as Jesus. For example, the nonviolence, love, and forgiveness advocated in the Sermon on the Mount, she says, are timeless ethical injunctions at the very heart of Theosophia. However, she also says that there's a second current found in the Christian Bible that she calls pseudo-Christian, that is, quote, elaborately made up legends and a long series of falsehoods and deliberate mistranslations that falsify history as well as distort or invert the actual teaching. And she documents this opposing current in some detail, and she says it was due to what she calls theological tampering. And now it's well known that not only were there more than 40 known gospels in 350 AD, when the 4 synoptic gospels were chosen from those 40 or 50 that were current at that time, and they're chosen by the church as being the officially accepted ones. But even those went through a great deal of editing, interpolations, and insertions as they were translated from the Aramaic or Greek to Latin, from one version to another by the early church fathers. And then there was also further distortions that occurred when they were finally translated into several very different English versions. And this outlook on the Bible and on the Gospels is kind of goes along with similar conclusions that were drawn by the 50 or so scholars, beginning with Robert Funk, who in 1985 began the Jesus Seminar. This was an attempt to collectively develop criteria for determining which passages in the Gospels, including the non-canonical one, the Gospel according to Thomas, could be reasonably assumed to be historically accurate or authentic. And without going into that massive confusion and the many books that have been written since then on all the debates and that are still ongoing, we can generally state with some confidence that depending on which passages you look at and you feel comfortable accepting, that Jesus was transmitting a fourfold conception of human nature. And again, one can go to various passages in the Bible to kind of sort this out, but the four would be spirit, mind, soul, and body. And the spirit, which is used in many different contexts, hundreds of times in the Bible, is the original Greek word was pneuma, meaning breath or wind. The Holy Spirit, or also the Paraclete, and is sometimes referred to as the Father or the Christos. And for example, in John 10:30, Jesus says, "I and my Father are one." And in John 3:5, "Except a man be born of the Spirit," that is pneuma, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. And then secondly, there's this concept of mind, which is very reminiscent of the Platonic concept. The Greek word is the same, that of nous. It's not the typical mind that we're used to, not the daily mind of chores and of personal concerns, but the mind of understanding, of higher reason and discernment, and sometimes connected with the heart. And then there's this very interesting sort of confusion in the Bible that came partly through the different translations. This concept of soul as suke, the Greek suke, which is the Hebrew nephesh, which doesn't actually mean soul in the way that we think of it as being the immortal soul, but rather prana, the life force that brings the sort of hidden energies to the physical constitution. So it's sort of the invisible vesture that's providing the energy for the physical constitution. And that's in Genesis mentioned as, it's sometimes translated as that man became a living soul, but it's actually a living creature. There's other passages in the Bible where nephesh is said to be that which we share with the animal kingdom, for example. And then the lowest or the fourth would be the Greek soma, which is the body. And we get this very interesting sort of dichotomy in the Bible where it's the dust of the earth, but in Paul, we're told that it can also be a temple of the Holy Spirit. So, and the other thing that's very interesting is if you take this basic fourfold division, you can see that how there's a very nice correlation with other Eastern traditions. Pneuma corresponding to in the Raja Yoga tradition with Atma, and in Buddhism with Shunyata. Nous with the Karanopadi in the Raja Yoga, which is called the causal vesture. Psyche with the Shukshmopadi, which is the more subtle vesture, but still material. And then Soma with the Stulapadi, which is the gross or earthly vesture, and so on. And you also find that a similar kind of correspondence goes on with Vedanta, which has a fivefold classification. So the Karanopadi is divided into two, kind of a higher and a lower mind, Ananda meaning, Anandamaya being the sheath of bliss, Vijnanamaya referring to consciousness itself, but a very pure form of consciousness. And then the psyche also getting a subdivision between the Manomaya and the Pranamaya. Again, it's prana being that subtle energy spoken of in the Eastern traditions, and mano referring to mind, but again, it's a lower form of mind. So all of this is gives us a basis for moving then into the Theosophical conception, which is a sevenfold differentiation. And with the sevenfold, we get some slightly different distinctions and gradations that are important that we'll see as we go through and we start to talk about them. But fundamentally, the point that Blavatsky makes when she goes through this analysis for us is that she's saying that there actually is no contradiction between these traditions, but there's simply different ways of subdividing the human character, the human nature, and that actually the sevenfold we will find will provide a kind of roadmap that will, and a substrate that will allow us to make sense of many other traditions, and also will be very useful as humanity starts to awaken to some of its greater inner capacities, that it will explain a lot that now currently is unexplainable to us by our current conception. And then also the critical distinction that's made in Theosophy is between the higher triad, which is immortal, it's called the immortal individuality, and the lower quaternary, the lower square, which is the vesture of incarnation. And this also is critical in the definition and understanding that of human purpose and the whole concept of how the concept of reincarnation is critical to understanding what we're actually doing here on Earth, and this capacity that we have for linking the spiritual with the material. And Blavatsky also points out that the sevenfold division has many correlations with the seven notes of the diatonic musical scale, for example, the seven colors of the rainbow, if you include white as the synthesis of the six. There's other subdivisions here where seven comes in. This is from the Bhagavata Purana, pointing to the seven lokas, again, interpenetrating worlds or planes of being, three of which are macrocosmic and eternal throughout the cycle, and four of which are microcosmic and ever-changing, and again, more related to the vestures. And the seven we find in many mythologies as well. There's the seven rishis spoken of in Hindu mythology, the seven sons of Brahma, which are the primary emanations of the logoic light that gives birth to the cosmos itself. The seven Dhyani Buddhas in the Buddhist tradition, again, connected with the seven kingdoms of nature, and having both a kind of an emanative function, that is, they differentiate into the kingdoms of nature, and a salvific function. They aid the forward evolution. This is the great turning of the wheel. They aid all beings in moving forward ultimately towards that state of enlightenment which they embody. And this has its correlation again in other traditions like the Zoroastrian, the seven Amesha Spentas, very similar to the Dhyani Buddhas. In fact, Blavatsky says that they're correlations, exact correlates. The seven Hathors referred to in the Temple of Hathor in Egypt. The seven divine spheres that are mentioned in the divine Pymander of Hermes Trismegistus, the seven worlds, seven circles. And we find it in seven coming up in the most iconic forms of sacred architecture as well. The Parthenon and the Pantheon, which is said to be, the most magnificent temple of the Western world. This immense dome has this sevenfold subdivision in multiple ways. both horizontal and vertical, as well as in its in other numeric orientations in various aspects. That the Great Pyramids also have that fundamental reference to 7, having a square base of 4 and each side being a triangle. And some of which are 7 leveled, like this one at Dosar, and this one at in Mexico, pre-Columbian 7-stepped pyramid. Blavatsky also points out that the 7 is a fundamental feature, one of the fundamental meanings of the cross, and again related to the Easter event, the crucifixion, and also related to the myth of Prometheus, in the sense that the spirit is voluntarily chaining itself to the rock of matter, knowing that tremendous trial, pain, and suffering will be the result, but in the end, that it is the means by which salvation, upliftment, aid is given to all of life. So again, you find that sort of archetypal meaning that is carried in the Christian cross and connected with the crucifixion of Jesus as well. So I'd just like to quickly walk through a couple of the meanings associated with the higher triad in Theosophical thought. The highest principle being that of Atma, which again is similar to Pneuma, as we saw, meaning breath, self, or spirit. But this is not the personal self that most of us refer to, right? Is what Carlyle called the unnamed, the impersonal, universal spirit. And Blavatsky says that it is, in one sense, it shouldn't be considered a human principle at all, because it is a boundless. It is a unity without boundary, without form, which, like the Buddhists say of shunyata, it does not exist, and yet it is. It transcends both nirvana and samsara. In the Upanishads, it's referred to as the real or the absolute. And although it appears as emptiness or darkness to the finite mind, it is said that to the sage or seer, it is a realm of absolute light and absolute sound. The 6th principle, or buddhi, as we know, is the vehicle of Atma, and is likened to a mirror reflecting absolute bliss, it is said. And that's one of the references of Anandamaya Kosha. And it is also connected with the logos, with the word or verbum of St. John, that was said to be, was in the beginning, that was with God, and that was God. And it is that the idea of the logos, which we find in Eastern thought, is a both pre-cosmic and cosmic radiance of the divine sun of intelligence that guides and resounds throughout the entire period of manifestation. And in Buddhism, it is also referred to as the term alaya, and is that synthesis of the aggregate of both the wisdom and the compassion of all the Buddhas. As a human principle, we could think of it as the divine soul. It's one of the terms that Blavatsky associates with it. And that which we would characterize as gives us the capacity for direct knowing of spiritual realities, spiritual truths. It's omniscient intuition in its highest form. But it's said that it also, just as buddhi gives manifestation to Atman, in a sense, is a reflection of the Atman in manifestation. It cannot manifest in the human realm without the principle of manas. So manas, which is the mind, the principle of self-consciousness and self-awareness, makes of buddhi a discrete and active rather than a latent and passive principle. And it said that without manas, there would be no connection between the immortal higher triad of humanity and it's the incarnating vestures, the vestures of incarnation. That it, again, as we pointed out, it makes of the higher spiritual principles cognizing, perceiving, and therefore potentially active forces in relation to the lower. And it has this heroic quality to it, as we mentioned in relation to Prometheus, that is capable of, in connection with the idea of the Sutratma, it was called the thread soul, because it provides this undying continuity between lives by which the essence of wisdom garnered from each life is preserved like pearls upon a string. That's the string of the Sutratman. This commitment to voluntarily incarnate, capacity to link heaven and earth, and to voluntarily incarnate in order to do so, is spoken about in connection with the Christian tradition by this in really magnificent way in both the writings of Blavatsky and Professor Iyer. And I'll end with this quote from HPB. She says that the gnosis supplanted by the Christian scheme was universal. It was the echo of the primordial wisdom religion, which had once been the heirloom of the whole of mankind. And therefore, one may truly say that in its purely metaphysical aspect, the Spirit of Christ, the divine Logos, was present in humanity from the beginning of it. The author of the Clementine Homilies is right. The mystery of Christos, now supposed to have been taught by Jesus of Nazareth, was identical with that which from the first had been communicated to those who were worthy. And we may learn from the gospel according to Luke that the worthy were those who had been initiated into the mysteries of the gnosis and who were accounted worthy to attain that resurrection from the dead in this life. Those who knew they could die no more, being equal to the angels as the sons of God and sons of the resurrection. In other words, they were the great adepts of whatever religion. And the words apply to all those who, without being initiates, strive and succeed through personal efforts to live the life and to attain the naturally ensuing spiritual illumination in blending their personality, that is the Son, the lower manas, with the Father, their indwelling divine spirit, the God within. This resurrection can never be monopolized by the Christians, but is the spiritual birthright of every human being endowed with soul and spirit, whatever his religion may be. Such an individual is a Christ man.
Kirk, that was really magnificent. I think that one of the things that we could focus a bit on is this idea of humanity as somehow spanning the most divine to the most human, and somehow within a human being being able to touch both of those worlds. And Kirk has provided us with all these different layerings, levelings that help explain how humanity does that.
Well, if one could touch heaven and earth or be in touch with the triangle that was pointed out, which is the spiritual, that is the formless, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, but that triangle. And somehow we can link that through our mind, through Manas or through our mind, in terms of our everyday life, to take that spiritual intelligence and create form in our everyday life. Then we're really able, it seems to me, to touch heaven and earth, so to speak, to bridge at least heaven and earth, and thus to make everything sacred in our everyday life. because we can bring the spiritual and the sacred down. But that does take a lot of practice and a lot of mindfulness and discernment, a lot of and the development of spiritual knowledge. But it's really amazing that that everything we touch, everything we walk on, if our consciousness or our mind is directed toward our spiritual vestures, that triangle, that can really transform the way we think about other people and about the objects we use. So it's pretty revolutionary when you get into it, I think.
When you mentioned about through our minds bringing in something into the world that touches the earth, I was thinking about how it's really marvelous to watch a bird make a nest, and they find all of these different materials, and yet they still manage to make a nest very much like the nest that their kind of bird makes. And then there's a human being. For example, Kirk's an architect. And what he brings through his human mind to create a place where someone could dwell is a whole different order of creativity that's coming through this human mind that goes beyond the instinctual. So I was kind of relating that to what you were saying, Maurice, and how deliberate that creation of a human building, for example, could be. Whether it was a home or a temple or whatever it was, it could be so carefully crafted through the human mind and brought into manifestation.
Is the cross in some way help us understand the link between heaven and earth? Or, the cross maybe as the cube unfolded, the 3 and the 4?
Well, hopefully, yes. Well, there's a lot to unfold with the cross.
But how about in terms of understanding humanity?
Yeah, and the link between celestial and terrestrial.
Let me put it this way: that there's mysteries there which we don't claim to know entirely. We have the sort of filmiest impressions about it, but Blavatsky does talk about it with great reverence, and she points out how it's a very ancient, going back to the birth of humanity, very ancient symbol connected with this process whereby the teacher, one who knows, awakens the same kind of divine intelligence, or aids the process by which the same divine intelligence awakens in the aspirant. And that's part of the whole mystery of initiation. And where there are specific trials, which might take a very different character in our day than they would in ages past, but nonetheless is said to be part of that process, where but fundamentally, it seems like it is again connected with the sacrificial nature, the transformation of both mind and heart, and purpose and dedication, the transformation of the will, and consequently, because of that, all the vestures on behalf of humanity as a whole. So it's that, again, as we started out with this, the whole of this teaching is really trying to explain and elaborate and help us begin to assimilate what the idea of the Bodhisattva path is. So it has to be, it begins with the dedication to live on behalf of others, on behalf of mankind. But that is simply an initial wish that has to be cultivated and deepened into a kind of universal love and upheld through many trials and as a kind of a vow and a dedication. And in the process of doing that, every act becomes transformed. Instead of it being something that one does for one's own benefit, it becomes a way of aiding nature. Nature both that can be seen and as best as one can, also regarding the unseen nature. And that over many cycles and lifetimes deepens and deepens, so that eventually, we get this idea in Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, which you've heard me talk about before, that idea of wanting to aid others in their process of awakening becomes a kind of a cancellation of the difference between self and other. So that there's a unity there. It's inserting oneself into the whole of humanity and to the whole of nature. That's, I think, fundamentally what the cross represents. And Blavatsky, she talks about in ancient Egypt that there was actually the aspirant who was going through this process of initiation was not nailed, but tied to in the formation of a cross, and had to go through an extended period in which they were attempting to serve nature and other human beings on inner planes. So it wasn't an outward form of service, it was an inward form of service, where actually they were aiding beings who were on the verge of losing their way. So they become guides and aids on hidden planes. So there's a lot to it, but I think that it's, again, this idea that one is identifying with the whole. One is has to have a secure center in that which is invulnerable. That's, again, part of the idea of the immortal triad, the three, which is the three squares that are the horizontal squares of the cross, firmly secure in that identity. And because of that, which also links one up to the whole of life and the whole of humanity. And because of that, one can descend into vestures, one can descend to aid. And that's the fourfold downward squares, down to the very lowest level in order to aid the least and the lowest, and provide some service, some aid. And that's the purpose. That's what the Bodhisattva does fundamentally. So I don't know if that helps or not, Robert, but that's what comes to mind.
Okay, thank you.
And when you are saying the Bodhisattva, you also mean the Christ-like being.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Renee, bringing that in.
Yes, Ramdas.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Kirk, thank you. I think what's important for us to understand is that, and you draw on many similarities. And the reason that there are those inevitable similarities is that this all comes from within inside us. And so once we get past the physical shell, then we get into things that we share with everyone else. What you called the soul or psyche, I think was one of the terms that you used in translating that. In my tradition would be called the subtle body. And that's what comes in and out of physical bodies and carries our ideas and carries our karma and carries our knowledge as well as our attachments and all of those things. And that once it gets purified, then our consciousness can really become awakened. But in so many traditions, the goal clearly is learn so that you can then help others. And what you call the bodhisattva in the Ramananda tradition, it's you reach enlightenment, you reach liberation, but it's liberation from having to be reborn so that you can come back to be reborn for the purpose of helping others. In other words, you're not coming back for yourself anymore. You're coming back to help others. And I think we see that in so many traditions, clearly in the mystic traditions, the idea of loving those who are in need becomes central to gaining wisdom.
Yes.
So, yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments. You reminded me that part of the myth of Prometheus is that the meaning of the term is foreknowledge. Prometheus is seeing ahead, and whereas Epimetheus is seeing, it's already passed. So he, as the story goes, he knew, he understood what he was in for, the dangers, the pain, the suffering, etc., and yet voluntarily, willingly descended with the fire of the gods to bring the fire of the gods to humanity. So that's, as we get in the mysticism of George William Russell, for example, he says that characterizes humanity. We came here voluntarily, but we kind of lost our way. we don't, and the whole point there is that beneficence and philanthropy is our natural state. That's
Absolutely.
where we begin to come into and to realize our true purpose, our natural purpose as soul beings is that philanthropic motive. And so it's something that, it's like the Buddhists talk about the mind in its natural state. The mind, that's not just kind of the still, vague vacuity. It has this universal beneficence to it. This willing descent in order to aid others, because it does not separate itself from any part of life.
Yeah.
Anyway.
What my teacher would often say is that love and compassion are verbs. In other words, they're not something that you can put in your pocket. If you're not practicing it, they don't exist. So once you get wisdom, wisdom is the ability to actually practice love and compassion.
The wisdom of love.
Yeah.
Love, philosophia is the love of wisdom, but it's also the wisdom of love.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ramdas.
Sure. Thank you.
I'm wondering, Kirk, if we can call on Kevin. I can tell he's been so actively listening. And I know he is someone who has this enormous heart, this enormous will to serve and to be of, real beneficent help to others. And I know he comes from a Catholic tradition to begin with, which you yourself did as well. And I just wonder, Kevin, what do you have to say, having heard this whole presentation? I'm wondering, what are you taking from this?
So one thing that came to mind that, obviously with the world events going on with Russia and Ukraine, is that can somebody like a dictator or somebody who invades another country and basically slaughter so many people, do they have the opportunity for redemption? And I know there was a book, I think it was called Did Hitler Go to Heaven or something like that? And it was all about, basically how the society has formed so many beliefs, and we believe in Santa Claus, we believe in the Easter Bunny and everything else like that. But can we believe in forgiveness of, mankind, even for such atrocities? And for me, I didn't read the book. It's on my list, but I think it's an interesting question to kind of just say, when I am at the judgment day, and I'm going to cross into the pearly gates or whatever, is it possible that such, evil can be surrounded by me? And I think it's a very difficult thing, because in my heart, I would like to say everybody is, capable of redemption. But it's really a very heavy topic to think about, to see if, you could be perhaps standing next to Adolf Hitler, who was a very religious man and a God-fearing man from what I've heard, but he still just committed so much atrocious crimes. So this was a very deep topic. I think you can look at it on so many levels. And I'm wondering, what is your opinion? Do you think you could meet somebody like that in the afterlife if you believe in that?
What a great question, Kevin. I really appreciate you bringing up that topic, and very thoughtful and appropriate to the day. What I was trying to present today was not my opinion, even though it makes a lot of sense to me. I was trying my best to give the theosophical view, which I'm still learning about. And but I know that the theosophical view is very specific on this theme, and but it's complex as well. So I think probably, if I can just very simply characterize it, Theosophy would say that it would be a mistake to think that one can be so destructive in life, be so violent to other human beings, can deny the opportunity for other human beings and for other life to flourish, and expect that somehow one would be simply forgiven by confession or by one's belief, and somehow realize a blissful afterlife. And of course, as I mentioned, Theosophy teaches reincarnation, so there isn't like a final place that you go. The cycle is perpetual. It has always been going on, and it will always continue going on. There are periods of rest and there are periods of activity, but there's not like one final place that we go to. There are higher levels of enlightenment. Those higher levels also provide greater spheres of service that one becomes capable of. And so that in any given cycle, but there are limits. So you could think of it like life as being a kind of school in which we're traveling through, the 8 grades of grade school. And if we get to a certain point and we're disrupting the class, we're not attending class, we're not studying, we're in fact hurting other children, breaking all the rules, you can't have someone like that in class. It's going to be a detriment to the rest of the students, right? And there may be others who are very sincere about wanting to learn and wanting to participate in a helpful way. So those are decisions. That's part of the burden of manas, of the decision-making, the choice-making faculty, is that it can choose to a downward path. It can choose a downward path. And what does that mean? It means that for that cycle, they're going to be out of business. They're going to lose the opportunities that are inherent in that cycle. But there is no trash heap in nature, that there are always future cycles. And even someone that degrades themselves, worse than the animal, there's still a living presence there that is part of the whole and will in future cycles have the opportunity again to try again. So that is important. It's a very important question you brought up, and a difficult one, but hopefully that gives a little bit of clarity.
As well as the idea that if we've all been through these different incarnations, we've played a lot of different roles, and we haven't always been heroes. So it also gives us the basis of compassion, knowing that we ourselves have done probably some pretty heinous deeds over our past. And yet, to the extent that we're able to rely on our conscience, look to the depths, what should I have done? And we have any kind of inkling of wanting to rise phoenix like out of the ashes, to pick ourselves up and to move on and to do better, we will also have that opportunity as well.
Yes. And we also get that statement from Krishna that whatever path humanity chooses, whatever path, that path is mine, Krishna says. And how could he say that? When people choose a downward path, it's because compassion leaves nothing out. It's boundless. And there will be opportunities, even if you can't aid that being in this life from destroying themselves, there will be an opportunity at some point, if compassion is real and living, to aid them in some way. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, in listening to everything today, especially Kirk's presentation, I mean, the title, Humanity Between Heaven and Earth, I kind of thought it was humanity stands between heaven and earth. But the more I heard the talk, it's more like, as human beings, we have the ability to move. And that's what's special about us. We have the ability to move between heaven and earth. And I don't know, it just sounded so dynamic to me, that ability that we all have.
Oh, beautiful.
Or move between heaven and hell.
Yeah.
How could hell be any worse than what we are able to create on earth?
Hmm.
You know?
I wondered, still in the echoes of Confucianism and the notion that maybe there is no afterlife, that all of these ways of breaking it down in 3s and 4s and 7s and is just a progression in terms of our soul's evolution in this lifetime. I don't see too many 12-year-olds doing great works of compassion. Not that they don't exist, but that I think this progression is maybe not over multiple lifetimes, but maybe our journey in this, our one and only lifetime.
Well, I imagine that if we were to live as if this were the only one, that would give us a lot of motive to live this life really well.
Yeah. I resonate with that a lot. And the idea that I could really screw up really badly, and then at the, just before the last minute say, oh yeah, my personal savior, we're all good, I'm going to heaven. Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a cop-out. I go with the monks' thing, that this is your opportunity to do it right.
The others, David, the other side of that though, and this is what I heard from prisoners that I was counseling, is they say, I'm already going to hell, so why do I care?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so that is also a problem.
Mm-hmm. Bob, do you have a comment you'd like to add?
It's kind of overwhelming. But I guess one of the things I was thinking about is myself. Where am I right now in terms of my consciousness? And are there other levels that, kind of inspire me upward or inspire me downward? Just as an example, when Kevin asked his question, is it possible to be forgiven? At least in the biblical tradition, there's only two people who could not be forgiven. God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and God hardened Judas's heart. They could not ask for forgiveness. And that is kind of interesting to me, is that at that point, there's this sense of my consciousness is me. It's not God hardening my heart. It's what I have done to myself, to the point of view that whatever is happening up there somehow has hardened my heart where I am. And then I don't know what happens to rebirth and karma with that. It's just an interesting thing. And I guess the question I have, how do how do you move yourself up? It seems like it's meditation, contemplation, knowledge. But I seem pretty low when it comes to all this. And it was interesting to me, but experientially, almost like another language.
Mary, can I call on you?
I think I'm going to be surprised if and when I get to heaven, who's going to be there. And I know that other people are going to be surprised if I get there.
Not me.
No. But it's true. You know, we are a work in progress. And it's interesting to talk about a 12-year-old having compassion. The only way they're going to know it is if they've got a model to emulate. So no matter what age we are, we should try to always show compassion and to try to be good to one another. Amen.
Aloha.
Goodbye, everyone.
Take care.
Mahalo.
Yes.